Good day, this is Shauna Casey, and welcome to this SOS educational webcast, Extreme Makeover ESPP edition. Due to the large number of attendees, no conference call service is available for this webcast. The sound will broadcast through your computer speakers. However, if you wish to ask a question at any time during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the questions and answers panel of your WebEx console, and we will do our best to answer them as they come in. Any questions that we don't get a chance to address during the webcast, we will follow up afterwards in an email. This morning we sent an email with a link to the presentation materials to everyone that registered as of 10 a.m. Pacific this morning. This session will also be recorded, and we will send a link to the recording and materials in the next day or two. I hope that all of you are familiar with Stock and Option Solutions, or SOS, as we are more commonly known. For those of you who are not, SOS is a leading stock administration, staffing, consulting, and outsourcing firm within the equity compensation marketplace. SOS provides interim and permanent placement, expert project resources, and total outsourcing solutions. To learn more, you can visit us online at www.sos-team.com or call us at 888-SOS 0199. Next, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today's session. We are pleased to have Emily Servino and Elizabeth Dodge on the panel today. With over 15 years experience in varied roles in the equity compensation industry, Emily has a unique appreciation for the opportunities and challenges of equity compensation. At Fidelity Stock Plan Services, Emily focuses on strategic marketing initiatives, thought leadership, and building Fidelity's strong industry presence. Elizabeth is a Vice President for Stock and Option Solutions. She runs the professional services team at SOS, which includes the tech, data, and strategic consultants. She joined SOS in 2008 and has been in equity compensation since 1998. Next is our standard disclaimer slide. We'd like to remind you to consult your own advisors before making any changes. As I mentioned, the materials are available on our website, and here again is the link. Thank you all for joining us today, and with that, I'll turn this presentation over to Emily, who will introduce our topic and cover the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna, and as Shauna said, I'm Emily Servino, and it's probably time for me to update my bio, because as Shauna read it, I realized that I am weeks away from marking my 20th anniversary in stock compensation, and for the last 20 years, I've been involved in many different areas around stock compensation, but one of my own favorite parts of stock has always been the employee stock purchase plan. So when SOS asked me if I was willing to participate in this webcast, I eagerly said yes. I never pass up an opportunity to talk about employee stock purchase plans. And I'm here today with Elizabeth to share some of what we've been seeing around ESPP and what we're particularly seeing in our client base around ESPP makeovers. And we have sort of a makeover theme for our session today. And because we chose that theme because we see a lot of companies who are really looking at their employee stock purchase plans with a new perspective and understanding the plans, the value that they're offering with their plans, and how they can redesign those employee stock purchase plans to deliver more value and engage employees even stronger through those plans. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover some of the foundational issues around employee stock purchase plans. We're going to spend some time looking at what's trending with ESPPs, how companies are setting up their employee stock purchase plans, and we're really going to talk about makeover opportunities, how to find the right fit for your employee stock purchase plan, whether your plans, if you have an existing plan, if you want to do some sort of a makeover, are you looking for just a touch-up or a whole new look, and how do you make over an employee stock purchase plan and still fit it into your budget? Before we get started, Elizabeth, any words of wisdom from you?
Nope, I'll just say that at SOS, we also love employee stock purchase plans, and I'm mostly just providing color commentary today, but we have seen, again, a resurgence of ESPP plans, which we'll talk about more. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a new ESPP these days. Probably should have come up with a fashion metaphor for that, but I couldn't work that in.
Dead cats in fashion. I'm not sure about that, Elizabeth. So, a little bit of, hooking on to what Elizabeth said, back when Elizabeth and I started in this business, prior to FAS 123R, employee stock purchase plans were really pretty common vehicles, and where they were offered almost exclusively with a 15% discount and a look back. And some of those plans even offered these kind of Cadillac offerings with a 24-month offering with 4 6-month purchases. And those plans didn't trigger any compensation expense. So it was a really great plan to be able to offer. It delivered a ton of value to employees. It didn't trigger compensation expense. And of course, with a tax-qualified plan where there was a disqualified disposition, the company was entitled to a tax deduction. But along came 123R, and companies really increased their concern about the compensation expense that was associated with their stock programs. And along with that compensation expense concern that was introduced with 123R, there were similar concerns that were building around dilution caused by stock programs. And what we saw on the ESPP landscape was that many companies chose to either discontinue their employee stock purchase plans or convert their plan into what's considered a safe harbor plan. And a safe harbor plan is a plan that offers a 5% discount or no greater than a 5% discount.
Emily, I'm going to ask you to pause for just a moment. It seems that a number of people are not able to hear the audio, so we need to pause for a second. Shauna, can you, well, I'm actually going to ask, can anyone hear the audio? Could you please type into the Q&A box so we know if it's just isolated or if it's everyone who is yes. Okay, so some people can hear and some people can't hear. So thank you. I apologize for asking that. I just had a little panic attack that the audio wasn't working for anyone. So they are dialing in though, Shauna, which is unusual. I didn't think can anyone hear it through someone said I had to mute and unmute to get it to work. And then there are a lot of people dialing in by phone, which I thought we had the phone number disabled, Shauna.
Yeah, we should have, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I apologize for interrupting, Emily, but my panic attack is gone now. So hopefully the people who can't hear, not that they can hear me saying this, they'll be able to listen to the recording after the webcast. Maybe you could type that in, Shauna. I apologize for interrupting.
All right, so we're back to it, Elizabeth?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, all right, okay. So hopefully you can all hear us. I imagine those of you who can't hear us will start to see you drop off on the attendee list. But so as I was saying, a lot of companies did convert their plans to safe harbor plans. And those are plans that offer no more than a 5% discount and no option-like features, which meant no look back associated with the plan. And as you can imagine, plans that are classified as safe harbor plans might have lower rates of participation in the plan because employees get lower levels of value out of those plans. What we have been seeing recently, though, is kind of a resurgence of interest in employee stock purchase plans. And the accounting rules hasn't changed. There's nothing that's changed on that front. But what we are seeing is that companies are reconsidering the value of the compensation expense of an employee stock purchase plan. And as companies do continue to focus their LTI awards on key contributors, there is a larger and larger gap between employees who have equity compensation and employees who don't have equity compensation. And an employee stock purchase plan can be a really effective way to fill that gap at a relatively low cost. And from a cost perspective, I'm referencing both the compensation cost as well as the share efficiency of employee stock purchase plans. So companies are really realizing this is a great tool that can be used to extend equity compensation on a broad basis very efficiently. What we've been seeing in our client base, and I know Elizabeth has been seeing this in the SOS client base as well, is that this resurgence of interest in employee stock purchase plans has driven us to a lot of conversations with clients about ESPP and how they can design their plans to meet their corporate objectives around participation and compensation expense. And even within the relatively narrow guardrails of Section 423, there's a ton of flexibility that companies have with respect to plan design for employee stock purchase plans. And there are particular components of plan design, particularly discount and look back, that have a big impact on participation. So part of what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some recent research that we did around plan design prevalence and then what plan design really means from a participation perspective. And this information really helps companies to make adjustments to their ESPP that are cost-efficient adjustments that will drive participation towards their corporate objectives. All right, so we want to start with a little bit of foundational information. And why do companies offer an employee stock purchase plan? You know, as an employee, it's a great thing, but what does the company get out of it? Well, there are some really strong indicators around engagement for employee stock purchase plans. And engagement is things like motivation, loyalty, retention, stock price awareness. And half of respondents indicate that their employee stock purchase plan increases their loyalty to their employer. And while some people may look at, 52% and say, well, that's not a very good score, I will tell you when we ask these same questions around restricted stock that the results are higher. But when you consider an employee stock purchase plan and the compensation expense that you recognize for it and the shares that you use under your ESPP, to get more than half of employees indicating that that plan increases their loyalty to their employer, I think is a remarkable win for the expense and share usage of these plans.
I completely agree. Yeah, and I would say that you won't generally, I don't know, you probably know the 401k data, but I don't think that 401ks or other benefit type plans generally have that kind of an impact. That would be
we do. And we do have some other very interesting research that we've done. I don't have it in this deck here today, but we have done some really interesting work understanding the relationship between employee stock purchase plans and 401k that you mentioned. And actually, these plans work very, very well together. We studied our clients and we looked at the 401k loan rates for companies that offered ESPP and companies that didn't offer ESPP. And what we found was across the board at every company size, companies that offered an employee stock purchase plan experienced lower loan rates against their 401k. And these plans can work really well together because 401k is a long-term retirement savings program where an employee stock purchase plan is a path towards savings that's a liquid investment. Right. So when financial needs arise, employees can tap into that ESPP rather than taking a loan against their 401k. I'm sorry I got off track. You know I love you.
No, that's fine. That's great.
So next up, in addition to the results on loyalty, we also find similar results with respect to motivation. And so I see it in the data that ESPP does have a positive impact on employee engagement. What we also see is that ESPP is identified as a benefit, that companies really think of LTI, options, restricted performance awards. They think about those tools as compensation tools, but they think about employee stock purchase plans as benefits. And I think this is important because companies talk about benefits differently than they talk about compensation. And as in a tight labor market where companies are competing for talent, having a robust benefits package is really very important for companies. And an employee stock purchase plan can be another arrow in the quiver of employee benefits that they can really talk to a broad base of potential employees about as one of their differentiating factors.
Another accessory in the closet, if you will.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we also did a little bit of look. We asked companies, what kinds of changes are you making, plan making, and what changes have you made historically? And what this shows us is that companies are more likely to be making positive changes to their employee stock purchase plans rather than reducing value out of those plans. So why is it? Why are companies looking at ESPP? I honestly could spend the entire 1 hour time allotment on this particular slide, but I promise I will not. This is kind of my elevator pitch around employee stock purchase plans. Why companies think about them, why companies want to pursue them and offer them to their employees. I think the very first one, I've mentioned it already, it's a broad-based plan. This is a plan that is available to every employee in the company, and it can be a really unifying factor for companies to have an equal benefit that's available for everybody. And, you know, particularly when I think about global companies, this is a message that I hear a lot from global companies. Every other form of compensation and benefits is localized, whereas an employee stock purchase plan can apply equally to every employee of a company across the globe. So it can be a really unifying factor for a company to offer this kind of plan. We're all in this together. We all have an equal opportunity to participate in it. Also, you know, employee stock purchase plans do represent cash inflow to the company. By and large, these are original issuance shares. There are a few companies that do open market purchase, but by and large, companies are using original issuance shares for to fund these programs. And when you think about the good old days, Elizabeth, with stock options, employees always paid to exercise their stock options. They paid less than market value, but they paid for them. And so we have the same sort of structure here with employee stock purchase plans, that employees are paying to acquire the shares, and that cash inflow goes into the company.
And I often, when looking at 10Ks and disclosures and such, I often see ESPP cash inflow called out as a significant source of cash inflow to the company. They don't call out every source of cash inflow, but they do call out significant ones, and ESPP often makes that list, depending on the plan and the enrollment, et cetera.
I love somebody who reads a good 10K. You know, another reason that ESPP is so hot right now is because these plans can be designed to guarantee appreciation at purchase date. With the right combination of discount, look back, and offering, you are guaranteed to deliver value to your employees at purchase date. Can't say the same thing about stock options, but with employee stock purchase plan, you can definitely do that. We see strong indicators around motivation, loyalty, and engagement. Those are benefits for the employer that they obtain out of this program. We also have been increasingly hearing from our clients that an employee stock purchase plan offers an opportunity for employee ownership outside of the constraints of 401k. I certainly don't want this to be a 401k session, but there are a number of things in the 401k world that's making companies reevaluate offering company stock as an investment option in their 401k. And for companies to choose to eliminate that investment option, that does eliminate a path towards employee ownership, and an ESPP can be a good replacement for that. Non-excessive, you know, we've got the IRS limits in here, so these plans are inherently non-excessive. They're expense efficient, and we really have minimal share usage under this plan, which is why ISS isn't concerned about employee stock purchase plans. And getting shareholder approval on an employee stock purchase plan, while it's a step that you have to go through, it essentially is, you know, a check the box kind of thing. You got to do it, but it's a non-event. Companies always are receiving approval on their employee stock purchase plans. And then the icing on the cake, you get a corporate tax deduction. Most companies are offering tax-qualified plans, so those tax deductions come in for disqualifying dispositions. But for those companies who are offering non-qualified plans, they do get a tax deduction upon purchase. Elizabeth, is there anything else that strikes you about ESPP here?
No, I think you hit on all of them beautifully. I'll just say, you know, they are, the 423 plans, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, are a little bit administratively more burdensome, but that tax deduction, and the benefit, the tax benefits received by employees, and just the design of the 423 plans really makes them a winning vehicle that people can really get excited about, especially if you do a good job communicating to your participants and educating them about the plan, which Emily will talk more about later.
Yeah, Absolutely. And good point on 423 plans. So now we're going to move into a little bit of data to show you, what's really happening from a plan design perspective. So what we did at Fidelity was we did a really robust data analysis on our book of ESPP business. And some of the first few slides, these are very similar to findings that you could find on the NASPP stock plan design survey as well. But we did our analysis in a two-part process. So we looked first at plan design, and then we took it a step farther to understand how plan design drives participation in the plan. So I'll relatively quickly cover some of the plan design features, but Elizabeth, to your point about Section 423 plans, tax-qualified plans do appear to be important to companies, with 80% of companies who are offering an ESPP offering a Section 423 plan. The benefit of a non-qualified plan is that you are not restricted by the 423 requirements, and you can get a little bit more creative in some of the things that you do and the value that you deliver with those plans. But by and large, what we see today are tax-qualified plans. A 6-month purchase period is the most common purchase period, followed by a 3-month period. Now, I should specify up front that in the data set that we looked at, we only disclosed information on sample sizes that were adequate. So we did not disclose information on companies that had 2-year offerings with multiple purchases in them because we didn't have an adequate sample size for that plan design. That is a plan design that's becoming rarer and rarer given some of the compensation expense challenges that companies face with the resets and rollovers. So in our data, go ahead, except
for the recently public tech and biotech sector, we're seeing, and this is anecdotal, this is not backed up by data, so please don't take it to the bank, but in our experience, in the SOS experience, the recently public, the going public and rolling out in ESPP, everyone seems to want to offer the longer offering period. We see a lot of 2-year offering periods. We see some 18-month offering periods, which I hadn't heard of until not very long ago. And then we're seeing also 1-year offering periods. So we're just talking about 6 months and looking at 6 months data here, or 6 or 3 or 1, et cetera. But the 2-year plans are definitely out there and a little bit of a resurgence. Now, we'll talk more about the accounting later, but they're terrible, horrible, awful in terms of getting the accounting to work. So my favorite are definitely the 6-month plans.
Yeah, but those 2-year plans, Elizabeth, they're so fabulous for the employee.
I know.
So 6 months definitely is the most common plan that we see. So for those of you who are looking at this chart and saying, 2 weeks, 1 month, like
who does that? Yeah.
I will say it is kind of crazy, but some of these are also what I would call direct stock purchase plans. These are plans that don't have discounts or look-backs associated with them. It's merely a convenient way to purchase company stock through payroll deductions with no commissions or fees. You'll also see that on the chart below, the discount chart, that shows the variety of discounts that are available. So the 15% discount is the most common discount, followed by the 5% discount. Those would be predominantly the safe harbor plans. We do have 2 classifications of a 0 discount, and those are 0 discounts with a match and 0 discount with no match. And the match is where companies are providing either a dollar or a share match to essentially approximate a discount. So on the next slide, if I can get it to move forward here. There we go. A couple of other things that I like to talk about with respect to employee stock purchase plans are some of the restrictions that we see with plans. And by and large, companies don't have sale restrictions on the plan, which means that employees who are purchasing the shares can sell the shares as soon as they deposit into their account. I think that, I mentioned the 401k loan work that we had done, and I think this really is a big reason why we might be seeing lower loan rates for companies that offer ESPP, because ESPP is clearly a liquid form of savings. 77% of companies have no sale restrictions, meaning the employees can sell their shares right away. We do see some companies, 11% have a 3 or 6 month sale restriction, and 12% have a 1 year or longer sale restriction, but the majority of companies definitely have no restriction. We're going to look in a minute at participation, and we do see that sale restrictions can impact participation in the plan. I think that's logical as employees look at the lack of liquidity of those shares and do they want to participate in a plan that doesn't offer them the liquidity. Transfer restrictions are kind of all over the map. The majority of companies are not instituting any sort of a transfer restriction. I should clarify, a transfer restriction says that employees can sell the shares whenever they want, but when they sell them, they need to sell them out of their captive broker account. Transfer restrictions, quite honestly, are a gift to the plan sponsor. A transfer restriction maximizes your corporate tax deduction, and it minimizes your administrative hassle with having to survey employees. By requiring that the shares are sold through the captive broker account, you are 100% sure that you're going to capture all of the disqualifying dispositions, and you're not going to need to deal with surveying employees to find out when they sold their shares.
And I have to say, 10 years ago when I started saying, why don't we put transfer, when I was hawking this, and I wasn't even a consultant back then, but maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we were saying transfer restrictions is a great idea. This is a great idea. Maximize your tax deduction, minimize your administrative burden. Companies were saying, oh, that's crazy. We couldn't do that. We couldn't do that. That's too restrictive on our employees. Remember, they can still sell. They just have, it's like a 401k. They can't transfer their 401k away. So it makes a lot of sense. We at SOS are big fans of the transfer restrictions.
And we definitely see transfer restrictions much more common with qualified plans, Section 423 plans, than we do with non-qualified plans. And that is because of the administrative challenges associated with tracking those shares. All right, so this is just kind of a quick snapshot to show you the amount of variety that exists within plan design. And this is simply looking at the length of the offering and the discount. It doesn't even bring in the look-back component, because if we brought in look-back, we'd have twice as many pieces to the pie here. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a ton of flexibility with plan design. So let's look a little bit
Emily,
at how plan design.
Just for a moment, we did have a couple of questions come in, if you don't mind pausing for a moment. One question is, and I can answer it anecdotally, but I don't have any data. Are the sale restrictions related to countries in which they participate, to the country in which they participate? Anecdotally, I'd say no. The ones that I've seen with a sale restriction are because the CEO usually, or the exec team, doesn't want participants flipping the shares. They don't want it to be a same-day sale. They want people to hold and to invest and to feel like owners of the company. Do you have any anecdotal response on that one, Emily?
So I actually have two responses on it.
There you go.
The data that I, not one but two, the data that I showed you would be transfer restrictions that apply to all participants in the plan.
Sale restrictions.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed those. There could be some potential jurisdictions where there are different rules that impact the employees in that particular jurisdiction, but what I showed would be an impact across participants regardless of jurisdiction. My second answer to that is that we are currently finalizing some work on better understanding employee selling behavior with respect to employee stock purchase plans, and we'll be coming out with this within hopefully the next 4 weeks. But what I can tell you from seeing the preliminary information is you're absolutely right, Elizabeth. The reason that most of these sale restrictions exist is because somebody in management says, I don't want my employees to use the employee stock purchase plan like an ATM machine. I don't want them buying the shares and flipping the shares immediately. And I will say that in order to be sure that nobody flips the shares, you do need to have some level of restriction on the plan. That's the only way you're going to ensure that nobody does it. But the concern that employees are buying these shares and selling them immediately is a little bit unfounded. In our research, we looked at shares that were purchased in 2012. We looked at them at the end of 2008, and 14. So on average, about 2.5 years of holding. And we found about half of employees were holding their shares at the end of the analysis period. Of the employees that sold the shares, only 6% of them sold within the first 10 days. So the concern that employees are immediately selling these shares is unfounded because most employees are not doing that. But the only way to ensure that no employee does it is to have some sort of a sale restriction.
Yep. And the other question we got is, do you see companies that restrict the sale of the participant sale of purchase shares until 3 days after the earning announcement, which was the same date as the purchase date? I don't have any data on that. I mean, other than the typical, insider. And there are companies that restrict, that take their blackout window and apply that across the company. Mostly I see insider segments that are 5 to 15 to 20 people rather than the entire company. But I don't know what you've seen, Emily.
No, I don't see anything. I don't have anything to add to that other than what you have, Elizabeth, that, if the company has a, window periods that apply to all employees, it could impact them, but I don't have anything in addition to that.
Specific to ESPP, yeah. All right, now I apologize. Let's get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Oh. No, it's always good to have questions.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to take a couple of slides to look at participation in these plans. And what I mentioned earlier was we did this data analysis because we wanted to help companies understand as they're looking at redesigning or adding an employee stock purchase plan, what they could expect based on different combinations of plan design features. So we looked at a bunch of stuff. I'm only going to share a few of them with you because we have a limited amount of time here. But clearly, qualified plans have higher levels of participation in them than non-qualified plans. And when we looked at participation, we looked at participation as total participation, U.S. and non-U.S. participation. So the black bar is total participation, gray is U.S., and red is non-U.S. And
I think it does say ISO on there. That just means a 423 qualified plan. So for you, the ISO designation, yeah.
So, and the reason that we looked at the participation for for U.S. and non-U.S. is because even where a company is offering a separate offering of their Section 423 plan for their non-U.S. participants, there clearly are some differences. And, Section 423 is a U.S. tax code, and it provides U.S. tax benefits. So those same tax benefits don't extend to non-U.S. participants. So non-U.S. participants generally have a taxable event at the time of purchase. They also are bearing the exchange risk that the U.S. participants do not have. And as a third leg of the stool here, with non-U.S. participants, you sometimes will run into challenges with communication and education. Remember, this is a broad-based plan to offer to all employees, and for non-U.S. participants, that may mean that you're offering this plan to employees that have lower levels of financial sophistication and lower levels of English fluency. And so because of those three things, it's typical to see lower levels of participation outside the U.S. than you see in the U.S. We also see that the length of the purchase period makes a difference, that companies that are offering 6-month purchase periods have the highest level of participation in their plans. Now, I will say that there is a relationship between the length of the purchase period and the availability of a look-back. And where companies are not offering look-backs with their plans, you're actually going to be better off with a shorter participation period, like maybe a 3-month period. But where a look-back is available, a 6-month plan is probably your optimal plan design from a participation perspective. We see participation dropping off at the 1-year plans. I think that is to be expected as well. Those are plans that have 1 year of contribution accruals and a purchase at the end of that 1 year. Well, 1 year is a long time for employees to wait to purchase the shares, and I think that's probably what's driving some of those participation figures. And again, we see the discount having a big driver on participation. 15% discount plans have the highest level of participation. It's interesting when you look at this chart, though, to see the 0% with a match plan having really robust participation. Those are non-qualified plans, and those non-qualified plans can be delivered to have very aggressive value delivery to employees. We have a couple of plans within our data set that have tiered matches based on salary band, all the way up to a 50% match, 5-0 match, which is why we see such strong participation in those plans. But here is one of the most interesting findings, to me at least, is the combination of discount and look back. And we really only had sample sizes that were adequate for the 15% plans. The other plans, we didn't have robust enough samples that offered that level of discount in conjunction with a look back. But what we do see here is we see that 15% discounts with look backs have the highest level of participation. I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody. But what is surprising to me is when you look at these numbers, it appears that discount is the largest driver of participation. While you do get a bump up with the look back, the discount on its own is the largest driver of participation. And I think that that's an interesting thing to look at for companies who are really conservative with their compensation expense and trying to decide how to maximize participation while minimizing expense under these plans. And I would suggest that for most companies, a 15% discount with no look back rather than a 10% discount with a look back, you go 15% no look back, you'll probably have a lower compensation expense and a higher level of participation in the plan.
Agreed. Okay, now I get to talk a little bit. So talking about the different features that companies have to consider when they're designing an ESPP. The first and biggest question clearly is it going to be a 423 plan or not? Now, many of you are looking at what you might already do with the plans you have in place, and that decision has already been made. But the biggest decision if you're looking at implementing a new plan is it going to be a qualified plan or is it not going to be a qualified plan? In my practice at SOS, we don't see a lot of non-qualified plans. We have a couple of clients with non-qualified plans. One of the clients, the reason they offered a non-qualified plan was because they had a large number of unionized employees and they didn't want to include them in the ESPP, but you don't have that choice if you have a 423 plan. So with a 423 plan, clearly most of you already know this, you do get a tax benefit for the U.S. employees. The taxation does not occur at purchase. It occurs instead at sale. Typically, you do have tax at purchase for anyone outside the U.S. And you have a lot more administrative hoops to jump through. You have to design the plan in a certain way. You have to include everyone who's eligible based on your plan design. You have limitations and rules and requirements around the discount, how long the offering length can be, how many shares, whether you have a limitation on the shares that can be purchased in the plan, et cetera. And then you have a lot more administrative hurdles as well, tracking disqualifying dispositions and qualifying dispositions, et cetera. So the non-qualified plans, you have the flexibility, you don't have the administrative hurdles, and you don't have the tax benefit for the employees. So moving on to other design choices, what are the other accessories you can add to your outfit? Discount, whether you have a discount, how big a discount, the look back, but as Emily talked about, and I thought you were going to mention this on the last slide, so I'm going to steal your thunder, or hopefully not, but the look back, the reason we think, and maybe this is on the education slide instead, my opinion on why the discount seems to be a bigger driver of participation is that the look back is a little more complicated. It's a little harder to communicate. It's a little harder for participants to understand. Discounts, they're used to those. They get those at the store. Look backs, it's a concept that you have to explain. So that's a decision and then a communication challenge with a look back. How long is the offering period going to be? How long is the purchase period going to be? Are you going to have sale or transfer restrictions? Which types of compensation will be eligible? And something interesting on that I learned not that long ago is that if you include certain types of compensation and not other types of compensation, so let's say you include commissions and bonuses and you don't include overtime, that could potentially, in some segments, potentially disqualify the plan because it might be looked at as discriminatory because lower paid people tend to get overtime and higher paid people tend to get commissions and bonus. I'm not saying, consult your own advisors, but at the same time, eligible compensation is something important to consider and can be difficult when working with payroll to figure out exactly which pay types you are including versus excluding. And then purchase dates. I'm going to stand on a little soapbox for a moment and say, please, 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 please don't have your purchase on December 31st. You have enough to do at year end and on New Year's Eve, and your stock plan professional has enough to do. God forbid they should actually go out and have a drink or attend a party on New Year's Eve. No, they'll be trapped in the office processing the purchase, which is no fun. But there are lots of other reasons. It's not about the New Year's Eve party. There are lots of other reasons not to have your purchase on 12/31. Or 6/30 for that matter. Think about mid-period, mid-quarter purchase dates. Off-cycle purchase dates work a lot better. I'm now stepping off my soapbox. The design of your plan really does drive participation, and it also drives your expense. The wealthier your plan, the longer your offering period, the more neato features like resets and rollovers that you include, your compensation will increase. Resets and rollovers often aren't very well understood by participants either. And Emily, anything on that slide that I missed that you wanted to make sure we included?
No, I think you did a good job, and I should have mentioned it, but I'm glad you did about the value of the discount and why employees respond to it, because it's easy to understand, to really understand the look back. I think that employees have to be participating in an offering period where the look back kicks in and to really understand how it works. So that's why discount, I think, is probably the largest driver of participation.
And the other little soapbox I'll stand on for just a moment, and you can stay on this slide, you don't have to go back, is that if you do have the luxury of designing a new plan, I really, really, really recommend that you have someone look at the plan language. It doesn't have to be someone from SOS, but an experienced stock plan professional. When you're rolling out a new plan, your lawyers draft up these fabulous plans, and they have very specific language that handcuff you to a certain policy, a certain procedure. And if you have someone who's experienced, review the plan and say, you know what, let's not say everyone who's enrolled on the purchase start date has to participate, and you can do a buffer period. So you have to be employed 2 weeks before and get your form in 10 days before and whatever else. Allow a little flexibility. If you are designing a new plan, don't just think about those features. Also look at your plan language and have someone experienced with stock plan, with ESPP plan design, and administrative capacity, not just the legal side, but in an administrative capacity, what language is going to handcuff you and make your administration much more difficult. We've done this for a number of clients lately, and it can be a huge, huge time and money saver to just tweak the language in your plan without really tweaking the design. So, okay, so more, Emily, is this my slide or your slide? I can't recall.
It's your slide.
It's mine. Sorry. So the shareholder approval, as Emily said earlier, this is really sort of a rubber stamp. You don't have to do a lot on the shareholder approval. Have you ever seen an ESPP fail shareholder approval, Emily? I haven't. I
have heard rumors of one.
Okay.
Okay. But I think it was a case where there were particularly egregious concerns across the board. But that's it.
And then think about the U.S. and the outside the U.S. or non-U.S. rollout plans. I'm a big fan of rolling it out in the U.S. first. Not that I want to treat outside U.S. as second-class citizens, absolutely not, but getting your operational procedures down inside the U.S. and figuring out how everything is going to work and rolling it out to maybe your U.S. employees first, and then pick a couple of fairly easy administratively and in terms of rules and regulations, secondary countries to roll it out to, and not trying to roll it out to 62 countries in one fell swoop will make your life significantly easier. Some countries, although I think this is diminished, some countries do require translations. Are you going to provide your materials, your educational materials in multiple languages? That can be an administrative and a costly administrative hoop that you have to jump through. the multiple stakeholders. So when you're designing this plan, when you're thinking about all these levers, then playing with all these accessories, if you will, do involve other groups. Don't let this just be, a decision made by the comp committee, a decision made by whoever is HR, whoever is running the plan. Definitely consider the legal aspects. Legal will definitely be involved. But think about tax. Think about the administration group. Think about payroll. It's very important that you have good relationships with payroll, but also that you can get the data that you need from payroll in a timely fashion. Because not only are you going to have to bring that money over and process a purchase, but you're also going to have to get that information for estimating your expense, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Human resources plays a big part. Oops, can you go back one second?
Yes, sorry. Got ahead of myself.
And then finance. And people poo-poo the finance thing. Oh, why does accounting need to know, blah, blah, blah. Well, unfortunately, for those very fancy, as I call them, Cadillac plans or maybe Neiman Marcus plans in this context, they have very complicated accounting. It doesn't look complicated on the outside, but when you get into the minutia of it, and most systems cannot do the very complicated 2-year, 6-month modification accounting, resets and rollovers. So finance gets stuck doing this in a spreadsheet, or I get stuck doing this in a spreadsheet for you. So really, really do take a look. Consider finance. Let them help inform the design of the plan, because trust me, there are a lot of people making a lot of mistakes trying to do modification accounting for ESPPs in spreadsheets. All right, now we can go to the next slide.
All right.
So what is your style? Personally, I'm more the Old Navy girl. I like the 6-month plans with the 15% discount. Maybe a look back, maybe not, but keep it simple, keep it easy to educate. What kind of a company culture does your company have? Is it white glove, hand-holding the employees through everything, giving them best of all things? Is it a tuxedo? Is it Neiman Marcus? Or is it a little lower budget, a little lower hand-holding, a little less Cadillac style? I guess I should be using the fashion metaphors. I always refer to them as Cadillac ESPPs, so I apologize. But yeah, understanding your budget, that's a very important part. And all those features, I said this before and I'll say it again, all those features that you add, especially the modification accounting, which we'll talk about next, really, really can increase your expense. I had a client who rolled out a 2-year plan, all the bells and whistles, really fantastic, doing the modification accounning in a spreadsheet, fraught with challenges, got really, really expensive really, really fast. And they have just recently, and this was another modification making the accounting even more fun, was they have just switched from their 2-year plan in the midstream, not at the end of a 2-year period. No, they switched everybody over to a 6-month plan because the expense and the accounting hurdles were so challenging that they just decided it wasn't worth it. So they switched to the 6-month plan. All right, so a history of our fabulous compensation expense associated with ESPPs. I think we covered a lot of this early on, so I don't think we have to go through at least the first primary bullet. But Staff Technical Bulletin, STB, or some people call it an FTB 97-1, which is now ASC 718-50, because we've all memorized all the new references and all the codified standards, I'm sure. I'm being sarcastic in case that's not clear. But it is 718-50. It's very, the old PDF of STB 97-1 was pretty easy to read. 718-50 has gotten a little bit harder to read, but it's pretty clear and it has a lot of good examples. And yet we see a lot of mistakes in the ESPP accounting. It does specify, these are the rules around ESPP accounting. I think before it came out, people were sort of using option-like valuation techniques, and it very clearly said, no, that's not how you do it. Here's how you do the 3 components of the fair value, et cetera. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. And then each purchase period is treated as a separate option. So you value it separately and you treat it separately. I have lately seen some companies come out and say, I've got 4 different purchase periods. I'm going to value each of those purchase periods separately, and then I'm going to average those fair values together and straight line the expense. So that's something that the audit firms actually seem to be pushing of late. But it does, the STB 97-1 really does lay out in great detail what do you do when there's a salary change, what do you do when there's an increase in contributions, et cetera. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this is what we were talking about. Well, actually, sorry, I don't have them printed out on my slides. We'll talk about this quickly, and then we'll talk about the three components. So the market value, what are the inputs? Most of them are fairly easy when you're doing your Black-Scholes valuation, and I'm going to have to accelerate because we want to leave Emily time for the end at the end of this. So market value, price, the biggest mistake I see in ESPP fair values is that people take the discounted price and they plug that into the ESPP calculator. It's not a discount. You don't use the discounted price. The component of ESPP, actually, let's go back to the last slide for a moment, Emily. I apologize. There we go. The three components, you have discount, you have look back, and you have a beginning price. The discount is included in a different component. So when you plug into your ESPP calculator, which you can get from a number of different public sources, when you plug in the market value and the price that are being used for the Black-Scholes pieces, the bullet 2 and bullet 3 on this slide, the discount is being valued separately. So when you calculate your Black-Scholes value, you are not discounting the price. That's probably the number one mistake I see in ESPP accounting. So let's go back to the next slide. Sorry, make back and forth and back and forth. Okay, expected term, unlike options, you don't have any guesswork. You know it's going to be 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, etc. Interest rates, we all know where to get those. With volatility, the good news about volatility for you recently public companies is you really usually only have to use a 6-month volatility or 1 year or an 18-month, and you get to that point so you don't have to use peer company volatility for the rest of your life or the next 4 or 5 years as you do for options and those that have a 4 or 5 or 6-year expected term. Dividend rate, we're going to skip and go to the next slide because very few of our clients have dividend rates. Please continue, Emily. Sorry, we went through that quickly to give you some time.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And here is where we get into our makeover section. And a lot of clients will come to us and say, this is the kind of plan I have. What are my options for kind of improving this plan? So we've taken a couple of common plan designs and looked at 3 different options for making over those plans. Just a touch-up, make me shine, or a whole new look. So we'll start with the 5% no look back 6-month offering. This is a safe harbor plan. So just to touch up, one thing that a company could consider to do to a plan like this would be to actually reduce the offering period to a 3-month offering period. In the absence of a look back, a shorter offering period is more beneficial for the employee. And we do see that those shorter offering periods where there's no look back have higher levels of participation because employees like to see a more frequent return. So by having 4 purchases a year rather than 2 purchases a year, you might see a little bump up in your participation. Now, truly, I would say that the most beneficial way to set up a plan like that would be to do a monthly offering period. I would never suggest that somebody wants to take this on 12 times a year. That's a huge amount of administrative work. From an employee perspective, I think a monthly offering period makes sense. From an administrative perspective, I think a quarterly offering period makes sense. And so to kind of, blend those together, I would recommend for a company with a 6-month safe harbor plan, consider dropping that down to a 3-month plan. That's not going to have any impact on your compensation expense. Or if a company has an appetite for a little bit of compensation expense, you could raise that discount level to 10 or 15%. Now, that's going to definitely have a bigger impact on your participation. We know that discount drives participation, and it is going to have an impact on your expense. And we've estimated the expense impact with some basic assumptions. Every company is going to have a different assumption. So based on our estimates that you can see in the footnote here, we would estimate the expense at either $2 or $3, depending on a 10 or 15% discount. And then a whole new look would be to offer a 15% discount with a look back, but to mitigate some of the expense of doing that by dropping it to a 3-month offering rather than a 6-month offering. You will have a higher compensation expense with the 6-month offering because of the longer time frame, but and that would probably drive your participation up as well, but offering a 15% discount with a look back, even with a 3-month plan, is going to have a major impact on your participation. And we would estimate the expense there based on these assumptions at $4.75 per share. I'm going to skip over this one because I know we're running tight on time, but I do want to talk a little bit about, and you can review these materials, look at the different plan design types of plans and what the options are. But I do want to just touch really briefly on the concept of a communication makeover. And the impact on your expense is going to be, no change on a per share expense. But I think that there's a huge opportunity here for companies to make over communications around ESPP, to find your voice around your ESPP and the messages that you want to share with your employees, and to do that in a more effective way than your current participation or current communications may do. You can just simply do things as simple as running an official campaign around the enrollment. You could redesign all of your communication and education materials, and you could look at, adding even more bells and whistles like videos, broadcast voicemail, on-site banners, desk drops. All of these can raise awareness around the program. We have been particularly inspired by video. We think that video is a very, very effective tool to communicate with participants, particularly in an ESPP plan. I kind of consider video to be edutainment. It's a little bit educational. It's a little bit entertaining. We have some very, very good success stories with our clients who have either used custom video communications or used some of the standard suite of video communications that we make available to our clients. And I have a sampling of some of the digital communications that our clients are using, our video communications. We don't have time to share them today, but I do think that video communication is a great opportunity to raise awareness and raise participation in your employee stock purchase plans. And a well-designed video communication can also be translated relatively efficiently to reach a broad base of employees. All right, Elizabeth, I think we've got a couple more points.
We did have a question come in, and I just wanted to address it because it was something that we talked about earlier. I'm wondering if anyone can share a template that helps to analyze the impact of an increased discount with and without a look back on share usage, compensation expense, contribution limits, etc. And actually that segues very nicely into do-it-yourself, estimating cost of a makeover. I have actually done this for a couple of clients now where we design a spreadsheet that sort of toggles things and does, you can say, oh, with a 15%, here's what your total cost would be. If the average contribution was this what your cost would be. Unfortunately, I can't share it because it is SOS intellectual property. Emily, I do think Fidelity provides a modeling tool to help estimate expense. Is that correct?
We absolutely do, and you can put in different different inputs, discount, look back, length of the offering period to estimate the expense. So I would definitely recommend that you check with your provider on any tools that might be available to you through your provider. Or Elizabeth, you want to talk about the tools on NASPP?
Yes, the fabulous NASPP website, National Association of Stock Plan Professionals, for those of you who are members. The executive director did develop many years ago a Black-Scholes for ESPP calculator, which is now available on their website. You can download it and play with it and plug in different assumptions, etc. I do think that someone emailed me just before the session and said there's a new and improved one. I'll have to find out about that. But I do think it's a little challenging to do it in the spreadsheet, but it's really not rocket science. You're just saying, oh, they're going to contribute this much money. That translates into this many shares. The fair value is this, and it's fairly simple math. The Black-Scholes work is done for you, and after that, it's really fairly simple addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So it is possible to do without being a rocket scientist.
All right, and then one last comment. I know that we're really tight on time here, but I do know that compensation expense is important to many companies. And as I talk with companies about compensation expense and their appetite for compensation expense, and there is another possible avenue to mitigate some of the expense on these plans, and that would be thinking about appropriate limits for the plan. So the IRS conveniently provides us with the 423 limit, the $25,000 in value that you can purchase. But I also talk to companies about who are they targeting for this plan, and what is the average salary of the employees that they're targeting to participate in this plan? You know, in order to achieve or reach the $25,000 limit, often you need to have a fairly high salary base to be at risk of reaching that limit. So if your average employee that you want to participate in this plan earns $80,000 a year, by putting in a contribution limit of $8,000 a year, what you're doing is you're allowing the average employee to participate to the max that they would be able to, assuming that 10% is your contribution limit. And you're limiting the employees who earn more than $80,000 a year to that $8,000 contribution level. What that means is that your executives, who presumably have access to equity compensation through other channels of restricted stock grants and stock options and performance awards, your executive population is limited to $8,000, which is going to reduce the number of shares that you purchase through the plan, thus driving down the compensation expense. So that can be a good way to mitigate some of the potential increase in compensation expense. And with that, Elizabeth, I think we are right on the hour. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
I did have a comment from someone that said when we were talking about plan design and administrative tweaks, and I did want to just share this because he's absolutely right. One of those tweaks should be don't allow fractional shares, only purchase in whole shares. But with that, it's a little off topic, but I thought it was worth bringing up, so very good point. All right, with that, I think we turn it back over to Shauna, and you can wrap it up for us.
Great, thank you. I'd like to thank our speakers, Emily and Elizabeth, who joined us today, and thank all of you for attending today's educational webcast. We will send the materials and recording in an email in the next day or two, so look out for that, and we do apologize for any issues that you may have had getting onto the WebEx today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.